This episode of Dorking Out is brought to you by
LexCorp. Mind over muscle.
And the number 0. How many times has a woman been flattered by your catcalling? 0. If you're looking to meet a woman, get on Tinder like everyone else, dummy.
Houston, flight is go.
Mila, let's go. SPM. Safety contact.
From Assignment X, Amalgamated Storytelling, and thesoniashow.com, it's Dorking Out with Sonia Mansfield and Christopher Allen Smith.
Welcome to episode 59 of Dorking Out, a podcast for people who like to dork out about stories and the stories and culture that we love, or at least the ones that we're paying attention to this week. That means movies and TV, books and podcasts, and everywhere else we find stories that interest us. This is the Dark Tower and Iron Throne edition. With me today is my co-host, professional writer and author of The Sonia Show, which is a day-by-day chronicling of something that I didn't have time to think up. Sonia Mansfield.
That sounds about right. With me today is my co-host, Emmy Award-winning filmmaker and nerd author, Christopher Allen Smith. In this week's show, we review the long-awaited adaptation of Stephen King's The Dark Tower, starring Idris Elba and Matthew McConaughey. Does it live up to the expectations? The answer is surprisingly long. In our second segment...
For something that's so clear and concise and obvious, it is very long.
In our second segment, the men behind HBO's Game of Thrones announced their next project, a controversial new series called Confederate, which is set in the present day, and the South has seceded from the Union, and slavery is still legal. We talk about questionable stories and being offended by something you haven't even seen yet. And speaking of Game of Thrones, Peter Brown from Assignment X joins us to talk about Sunday night's episode and last week's episode, since we were on vacation last week. And by we, I mean Smith, because I'm actually going to be on vacation this week. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's get this podcast started. Hey, want more Dorking Out?
Yep.
You can visit our website at dorkingoutshow.com.
You can.
And you can like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter.
On Twitter.
Do you listen to us on iTunes?
Yep.
It's cool.
It's cool.
We won't tell anyone.
Nope.
Please take a few minutes out of your busy day of pretending to work while you watch cat videos to give us a review on iTunes.
Cat videos!
For some reason, iTunes really cares about reviews, and it helps us attract more listeners, and you want us to have more listeners and be popular and cool, don't you?
Yep.
Of course you do.
Yeah.
And now, on with the show.
Yeah. That brings us to topic 1, The Dark Tower and the Art of Adapting Books to Film. Sit back, folks, because this one is going to be a doozy. It all starts back in the 1990s. It was an era of pipe dreams for nerdy story lovers. While more and more genre movies were being made, they missed as much as hit. It was a time when moviegoers just couldn't seem to trust their source material. These, after all, were the years when Joel Schumacher took Batman, the very raw materials Chris Nolan used to make The Dark Knight, and chose to make Batman and Robin instead. Every time a genre movie was made, Hollywood directors and writers, they just had to put their stamp on it. So that usually meant cutting out key plot points, completely revising characters and storylines of beloved source material, replacing it with Hollywoodized versions, even while nerdy fans just dreamed of the day of well-made, direct adaptations of their favorite comic books, stories, whatever. For every Dick Tracy, there was a Saint, starring Val Kilmer. Look back, it was awful. For every Contact, starring Jodie Foster, there was a Judge Dredd, starring Sylvester Stallone. It was a time where the greatest nerd stories ever told always seemed out of reach. I remember discussions back at comic book shops about how great it would be if somebody would just take J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and make them into 3 films a fantasy trilogy, doing for fantasy storytelling what Lucas did for sci-fi storytelling with his original Star Wars. It was a great idea. One of those ideas that was so great, there's no way Hollywood is ever going to pull it off. Or wouldn't it even be more cool if they used Marvel Comics as the basis for movies, but they did it like they did it in the comics? So characters could go from one movie to the other and meet up and have, fights and whatever, and it wouldn't be like they're all siloed off like, Batman or Superman or whatever. They could all cross over into each other's movies. The smart money said those things were never going to happen. Well, by the early 2000s, Hollywood began to get smart. They did faithful adaptations of X-Men. Then in one glorious year, 2001, which is glorious for this single fact alone, if you think back to 2001, they released the first Harry Potter movie and the first Lord of the Rings movie. They were both smashes, which led to great series of adapting long time, difficult to shoot, difficult to translate books, or it was thought that it would be impossible to make Lord of the Rings back then because they were so big and sprawling or whatever. Anyway, they did it. They were smashes, and Hollywood was starting to figure it out. They did the Harry Potter series, went on to become a classic. Hunger Games went on to become a series of much loved movies by its fandom. Game of Thrones.
By its fandom.
Well, it's a good movie, but it's not, one of the classics, I don't think. But then we got also on TV, we got Game of Thrones, which is, Game of Thrones. And then, even though we're not big fans, The Walking Dead, a comic book to TV adaptation, which is a monstrous hit by being relatively faithful to the source material. But one series through all these years stood out above the rest, towered over them.
You're talking about Veggie Tales, right? Veggie Tales.
Towered over them, if you will. Thank you for screwing up my pun, my
You're
stupid
welcome.
tower pun. That was
Veggie Tales.
That was Stephen King's Dark Tower series. Now, Stephen King is such a prolific, such a well-loved storyteller that he's got many, many undisputed classics among the ridiculous number of adaptations. Here are some of the movies that have come from Stephen King: Stand By Me, Misery, The Shawshank Redemption, The Shining, The Dead Zone, Dolores Claiborne, even Arnold Schwarzenegger's Running Man.
And Carrie.
And The Dark Tower was his magnum opus, his series with the most ardent fans begging for a faithful adaptation of this series about a mythic gunslinger traversing barren, magic-filled lands to kill a villain who may or may not be the devil himself. That sounds like a pretty good movie. Surely, in this era of Game of Thrones, can you hear the sarcasm in my voice? Surely, in this era of Game of Thrones, Harry Potter, and The Walking Dead, a studio could see its way clear to do a diligent, modern adaptation of this untapped storytelling series. In fact, plans were announced in 2010. Ron Howard was going to direct the first in a series of Dark Tower movies, which would interlock with television series that go on at the same time that would adapt certain portions of these books in a Fargo-like, short-run TV series. Akiva Goldsman, hot off his Oscar-winning screenplay for Howard's A Beautiful Mind, was going to help adapt. And then what happened? A little of this happened, a little of that happened, the Hollywood system got going, Sony started to do what Sony always does, and then Howard dropped out. The ambition was pared down from 7 or 8 movies in the series to a single movie that wasn't even based off any of King's existing books. The Dark Tower, which hit theaters this weekend, starring Idris Elba as Roland Duchesne and Matthew McConaughey as the Man in Black, is a story which takes place after the last books in the series happen. For Goldsman, one of the credited writers of this movie, and also a writer on Joel Schumacher's 1990s Batman and Robin.
We'll never not bring that up.
Well, we're not going to bring it up because now we got to bring it up because A, that kind of explains a little bit of about what's going on here, and B, the man's got an Oscar. We have to explain who this man was and his crimes.
Yes.
The Oscar
His
seemed to
crimes.
the Oscar kind of wiped him away, and I got to tell you, I am petrified at what's coming down the pike with his work on Star Trek Discovery. But we'll get let me finish this.
Yes.
Quasi intro, quasi review. So you have one of the most beloved storytellers of the modern era give you 8 stories, and no, none of them are good enough. You have to replace them with your own. Director Nikolai Arcel, Akiva Goldsman, these guys, Sony, did they learn nothing from Lord of the Rings? Did they learn nothing from Harry Potter? Did they learn nothing from the last 20 years of film adaptations? Sonia, what did you make of The Dark Tower?
This movie was boring AF. I was so bored. There were 2 things about this movie that I really liked. Idris Elba and the fact that it was 95 minutes long. I was like, yes, it is 95 minutes long. Woohoo! It is such a weird movie in that I felt like it just weird in that it was just so disappointing because I know it's based on 8 books. And right. I was like, this is what everybody is freaking out about? Is this what everybody loves? Because honestly, I haven't read the books. So I'm listening to your intro and I was like, so what we're seeing isn't even one of the books, is what you're telling me.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you.
So now what I read after seeing the movie is now they're talking about there's going to be a TV series.
Right.
And the TV series is going to show the story of like how Roland, that's Idris Elba's character, became a gunslinger and how the Man in Black got his powers and explain his motivation, which was one of my big problems with the movie was like, why does the Man in Black want to bring down the Dark Tower?
Why does the Man in Black care about the Dark Tower?
Yeah.
Who is the Man in Black?
So it's like this movie is like the end of a trilogy that we haven't seen.
Yes.
I don't understand anyone's motivation.
Right.
I don't know who anyone is. And it takes like the 2 like quasi interesting characters and kind of puts them to the side and focuses on some kid that I don't give an F about. Yeah. He's boring. He's so boring. He's just another kid, like no real personality, who's being told he's special and has special powers and then seems instantly to be able to use them, the right. Mary Sue effect, I guess,
right.
in play here. I really didn't like this movie.
Yeah.
It kind of made me mad, actually, after the movie to read that there was going to be a TV series that explains everything, because then it ruined the TV series because now I know how it ends.
Because here's the other thing that you and I both know, that everybody watching this movie crash and burn at the box office knows, because it didn't even make $20 million. This movie's not going anywhere. That series is never getting made.
Right.
That series is up there with the series of Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies that was supposed to get made. That series is going to join a long list of, hey, we're going to make this. That series is going alongside Luc Besson's Valerian sequel.
I just
that
don't.
He's already written. Keep going.
This movie, I was kind of like just in awe of how boring it was. Like
right.
Just so boring. And like Idris Elba is in one movie. And Matthew McConaughey seems to be in a totally different movie.
Right.
And he never looks the part to me.
Right.
He never seems menacing. It's like, oh, there's Matthew McConaughey. He's gonna give us a ride to the Dark Tower in his new Lincoln. Like, I never at any point do I believe that he's scary. He looks like a weird, like, I kept thinking he looked like he would have like a Las Vegas like magic show.
Yeah.
That's what he looked like to me. And like I said, they never explain his motivation. And apparently Idris Elba's character, Roland, has some sort of special power to avoid his magic, but that's never explained. And
Right.
and the magic that the man in black has, that's never explained. And we never get to see the gunslinger do anything cool until like the last 15 or 20 minutes of the movie.
Which, as gunfights go,
is pretty cool.
it was kind of cool. And
Honestly, the only scene in the movie that's really good is this, like, there's an attack on this village or whatever.
Right.
And I don't even remember why they're there because it's stupid and boring. But Roland, like, stops everything and he's listening. And he's just listening, and everything starts to get a little bit more quiet and a little bit more quiet and a little bit more quiet. And then pretty soon he can just hear the footsteps and he like just fires his gun. And they give that away in the preview.
that's right. I was thinking about, this is a baffling movie. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that long introduction and kind of set the table for all this is we know how to adapt movies now, or books. That's one of the things that I think people have kind of, in this era, don't really understand, but they don't really need to understand it, which is, back in the 80s, you couldn't make Lord of the Rings because it would take literally a cast of thousands, and you just couldn't make movies on that scale anymore. There were certain kinds of movies, say what you will about the Star Wars prequels, there were certain kinds of movies that if you wanted to do certain things in the movies, you just couldn't. You literally had to wait for the special effects to get good enough to where you could do these big, crazy, fantastical things. That's one of the reasons that comic book movies and fantasy movies and sci-fi movies over the last 15 years have exploded, because now you can really do them right. And when you do them right, they are spectacular, fun, thrilling movie experiences.
What was the budget for this movie?
My understanding it's $65 million.
It doesn't look it.
It doesn't look, well, see, that's the thing, is it looks $65 million, and $65 million now is like $10 million in the 80s, $15 million in the 90s. It's a relatively modest budget.
Not only is this movie incredibly boring, I think it looks bad. It looks bad. Like, it's dark. There are creatures in the movie. I have no idea what they look like. And it's just poorly edited.
Yeah.
It's a bad movie.
There's a couple things that struck me as I was coming out. This movie, I think, is supposed to be a distillation of the whole mythos of the Dark Tower and all the inlaid history and all the details of the world and everything, and they touch on some, but it's insane. This just seems like the biggest whiffed opportunity I can think of. I imagine adapting the Harry Potter series, but you skip all 8 books, and the first Harry Potter movie is Harry Potter and the Cursed Child.
Right.
And imagine if that was the story that finally Harry Potter's going to be on the big screen. Finally, we're going to be able to see magic the way it's intended. Finally, we're going to be able to see Hogwarts and all these places that we've dreamed of from this magical series of books. And that's the movie that gets it would. I can't imagine the fury that I would feel if I were a Harry Potter fan and had and went through with Harry Potter what Dark Tower fans and just regular moviegoers that wanted to see a cool movie, if this was what kind of greeted it. But here's the other thing, is there's a couple details that they kind of drop in. This is almost like I've heard several kind of reviewers talk about this. This is a movie that seems to be made kind of right next door to the epic movie it was intended to be. Because they drop a couple hints, they drop a couple details in this, they drop a couple story points in this that when you hear them, you go, wow, that's awesome. What? Tell me more about that. Nope, we're gonna skip over it. One, Idris Elba is a descendant of King Arthur.
That's the thing that made me laugh out loud in the movie. I was like, what the
Well, here's the
F?
thing.
What?
Here's the thing. His guns are made from Excalibur.
And that's a totally throwaway line.
Exactly. Here's the
it's
thing.
like, oh, by the way, his guns are made by
what? His guns are made out of Excalibur, and if I remember correctly, it's either him or the Man in Black is somehow descended from Merlin.
Oh, see, now I just assumed that this was like the Dark Tower and King Arthur were some sort of connected universe thing.
They were something, but that's the thing is there these things that's like, wow, that sounds kind of cool. That sounds like an extremely interesting, cool background that I would like to see. Nope, none of it. We're not going to touch on any of it. The other thing, we're going to drop those little details and you're on your own. They don't really connect up to anything. It's kind of like they're teasing you with the cool movie this could have been, but nope, you're not going to see it.
And that's not okay. Like these movies, and we have like a lot of franchise movies now. And like we kind of talked about this a little bit with The Mummy. Like these movies have to stand on their own.
Yeah.
Like they have to stand on their own merit. They can't just be like, well, we're building a world here and the next movie's gonna be amazing. Like,
That's
no,
right.
This movie has to be good. This movie is not good.
No.
Not good. It took all my strength not to like reach for my phone and start screwing around.
Wow.
Like, oh, I have like Words with Friends turns I could be playing right now. Like, It was just real. I've said it over and over. I can't stress enough how very, very bored I was in this movie.
You know what?
And it's so predictable. Predictable too.
Yes.
Like literally. So there's like the kid at the beginning, he's like, I'm doing all my sketches in my notebook. And then they show him at the school. And I was like, cut to bully taking notebook in 3, 2, 1. Here comes the bully.
That's
Takes
right.
the notebook, and like just and the stepdad, he doesn't like him, and just so everything, or even everything around the like Dark Tower part is awful and predictable too.
Yeah.
Like it's just what a mess this movie is, and what a waste of like two really good, awesome, charismatic movie stars. These guys are movie stars.
Yeah. That's the thing.
Like,
Idris Elba and Matthew McConaughey, I thought they both did great jobs. I really was interested. I was interested and creeped out by just the weird, nonchalant evil of Matthew McConaughey, how he could just walk through and point at people and cast creepy spells on them and stuff.
I wasn't at all.
But here's the thing is, those details you can see are lifted out and dropped into this, so you can almost see these are everything that's cool was created by King, and the story that they're put in was not created by King. So you get this weird effect of, wow, there's something very cool, kind of close to me, but it's also kind of far away. And you can see a perfect separation between Stephen King and Akiva Goldsman and the other 3 credited screenwriters for this. It's weird, but I want to throw another idea by you. Now that we're talking about this, I'm sorry to interrupt. One of the things I understand, I've actually read kind of a fair amount of Stephen King, which I like. I have never delved deeply into The Dark Tower because it was kind of like Game of Thrones, which is it's one of those series that I hear is fantastic. I'm going to get to it when I have time to really focus on it and have fun, so I haven't gotten to it yet. But my understanding is The Dark Tower, actually, all of Stephen King's books, every single one of them, tie into The Dark Tower in some fashion. In that there are references, and as I was watching, there was like the Overlook Hotel in one of the pictures in here. There were a lot of Stephen King details.
Oh yeah, there's like a Rita Hayworth poster.
Right.
Down by the portal from Shawshank, and we saw somebody walking Cujo, basically.
Exactly.
I think Christine the Car was in there.
That's right. That's true. So there's all these things but I think they're even name checked. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Jake's father's brother was was River Phoenix's character in Stand By Me.
I don't remember that, but that sounded so like right out of Spaceballs. I'm your mother's brother's
Exactly.
college roommate. What
So
does that
here-
discuss?
so
Absolutely nothing.
So let's think about the towering figure Stephen King has been for the last 40 years in all kinds of storytelling. He's the biggest name in fiction in my lifetime. His movies have won Oscars, won crazy awards. There's like 40 or 50 adaptations of his movie. Carrie has been adapted 3 times. Anyway, so you have all of this series that ties together this incredibly important, incredibly massive storyteller, and you just ditch all of it. You just you don't do these connections. There's a pretty heavy Shining tie-in that it pretty directly ties this into The Shining, which is one of King's biggest books. That goes kind of untapped, and it's just, and I'm completely baffled that the screenwriters, the storytellers are going down this route.
If instead of doing Lord of the Rings, like Peter Jackson was like, hey, you know what? I was thinking maybe I would just do a movie about like what Sam's life was like back at the Shire after all the adventures.
That's right. And we're going to reference them, but we're not really going to show them to you. And then if you like this movie, which is going to tank because it's a weirdly formed movie, then we'll make Lord of the Rings maybe.
Maybe.
That's not going to... Well, the other thing is, that struck me about this is there's a thing that low-budget filmmakers do when they have a fantastical story that they want to tell, but they don't have the money for it, which is they spend money on a couple scenes to show you a fantastical world. Then they figure out a way to bring the characters from the fantastical world into our world so they could just shoot on normal, regular streets or whatever. This is how The Dark Tower ties in to Galactica 1980. The unbelievably awful Battlestar Galactica series, where the network slashed the budgets, they kept up a couple of the sets, but they had all the Battlestar Galactica people hang out in Los Angeles. Which, if you ever get a chance to just look at what the bottom of the barrel, budget-cutting 1980s television was like, find Battlestar Galactica 1980. It's an achievement in crappy, low-budget, mainstream storytelling. And the mark that leaves on The Dark Tower is you have this Idris Elba. He's got this very cool persona. He's got this cool duster. He's got this cool character. He's got these magical guns. And he's just like wandering around New York. It's almost like...
Honestly, that was like the only part of the movie that was remotely interesting, was like when he was riding the bus and he sees those girls who are, you know, I don't know if they're supposed to be prostitutes or whatever, but and then he says, "You've forgotten the face of your father." Like that's like the best part of the movie.
It is. No, that's good, but
because it goes back to like, you know, fish out of water stuff is always funny.
Yes,
like,
it is. You know?
So that part's gonna work. So like for me, like I was like, oh, that like there's a little hint of maybe something else they could have done to make this movie more interesting.
Exactly. It's imagine if The Empire Strikes Back began with Luke going through some weird portal and hanging out in San Francisco, wandering around with his lightsaber, riding the bus. God, the more I'm thinking about this, I am so offended on behalf of Dark Tower fans that this movie got made. It's astounding.
Mm-hmm.
The whiff, and then and the reason I talk about, you know, the backstory of the Dark Tower and all this is, I'm thinking if you were to take any of these books and make them into a 10-part HBO series or Netflix or something, if I were Ron Howard and I was having trouble getting Sony or Universal to write the check to start this grand project, I would have put myself on a rocket, pointed at Netflix, and just gone to them and say, "Give me the money to do this." Oh man, it's
a missed opportunity.
It's that is one of the things that I find so fascinating about this is train wrecks happen in Hollywood all the time. But train wrecks like this, where you have this wonderful, it's like the Three Stooges need to move a case of Fabergé eggs. It's just like they get this unbelievable opportunity, and you just watch as they drop every single one of them. And the ones that don't break when they hit the ground, they step on. It's just, oh. So that is our review of The Dark Tower. Sonia?
We were able to bring in the Three Stooges and Battlestar Galactica 80. So
that's right. So what do you think of that?
You're welcome, everybody.
So real quick though, what's your grade for this? What's your number?
I would maybe like a 3, and that's 100% for Idris Elba. Like,
yeah, I would. Yeah,
I could care less about. I'm gonna forget I saw this movie after we're done recording this.
I would give it a 3 or 4. That's the thing, and at some point, Sonia, you and I do need to have a discussion about Rotten Tomatoes, because this movie isn't so much bad, because I think it has like an 18 or a 19 on Rotten Tomatoes. It's not so much bad as just supremely boring. Like
it's so boring and it completely forgettable. I'm not joking. Tomorrow, someone will ask me what movie I saw this weekend, and I will not remember that I saw this movie.
It is fascinating. But yeah, that's the thing. We usually don't like to just tear open on movies on here.
No, not at all. I want to come on and talk about movies that are good and recommend good stuff, because there's so much good stuff out there that I would rather us spend our time talking about stuff that's good. But, this is based on such an acclaimed series that people super love, and I'm just kind of fascinated that they screwed it up so bad.
Yeah, I want to read the book on the making of this movie, because for a while when Ron Howard was announced, it sounded like, wow, here's Lord of the Rings 2.0, it's coming. And holy man, something happened. I took my eye off the ball somewhere around 2013. I was expecting The Dark Tower to show up. It's finally showed up. It's like, wait a minute, what? What happened here? Anyway, Battlestar Galactica 1980, that's what happened here. On to the next topic.
Topic 2. No script has been written and not a single frame has been shot, but the HBO show Confederate is already engulfed in controversy. Created by David Benioff, I hope I pronounced that right, and D.B. Weiss, the men behind Game of Thrones, and Nichelle Tramble-Spellman, a writer and producer of The Good Wife, and her husband Malcolm Spellman, a writer and producer of Empire. Confederate is an alternate history drama set in modern times in which the South has seceded from the Union and slavery is legal. Right after the announcement, the Twitterverse was lit up and there were calls for boycotts. A lot of folks don't love the idea of the men behind Game of Thrones, 2 white men who have often faced controversy about Game of Thrones' lack of diversity and sexual violence, telling this type of story, even with the Spellmans' involvement, and the Spellmans, I should mention, are African American. There are concerns that the timing for this type of show really sucks, because, really racist Trump supporters are kind of more emboldened than ever. And on the flip side, there's a backlash to the backlash, asking if we're supposed to be offended and start protesting movies and TV shows that we haven't even seen yet. So, yeah, we're going to talk about it. Smith, what do you think? Is the outrage premature?
Yes.
All right.
Done. We're done.
No, let's go.
Well, on to topic 3, Game of Thrones. Here's the thing that it's one of those things where you're seeing 2 of your friends fight, and you want to cool everyone down, and you see the arguments on each side, and you wish they wouldn't be getting so mad and crazy at each other, and you just want them to settle down. And so there's that aspect, which is I do see the nervousness about this type of show being made now. I do see the worry that people who are not into filmmaking, who are not into storytelling, who view this whole world kind of from the outside as pure consumers, you hear the story of this and it does not sound great on first blush, and you're wondering what they're going to do with it. So I understand the controversy. I'm sorry. I understand the nervous feelings.
Yes.
I understand Hollywood does not have a great track record in portraying issues like this with sensitivity and nuance. But then I would say Benioff and Weiss, Spellman, they have really good track records when it comes to nuanced, difficult subjects portrayed in this prestige era of television. And I'll admit, I don't understand some of the attacks that they're getting for Game of Thrones, because they're essentially telling the story of this medieval, brutal, awful world where the rulers get to do whatever they want, commit any crimes that they want, and the people just below the rulers, all the way down to the lowest person in society, have to live with those decisions, have to suffer for those decisions, have to get, murdered, raped, killed for those decisions. And that is the theme of the story that they're telling. I remember back when Dr. Melfi, if I remember correctly, on
The Sopranos.
The Sopranos, there was that episode where she was raped, and which is this is going to sound awful, but I think you'll understand what I mean by it. That is an unbelievably great episode of television, because she's in this situation where she's victimized in this horribly violating way, and as a moral person, she has this client that all she has to do is give him a call, tell him the story, and
he will take care of this for her.
He will take care of this for her. Kind of the revenge that I would believe if I were ever raped, I would definitely have fantasies of revenge on the person.
I'm sure that is very common.
So, and she has this ability. So the question becomes, what is she going to do as a moral person that's been counseling Tony for years about what to do, how to get out of this and how to make right with his life and how to see his way through all these neuroses that being in this awful business has created in him. She's got to fight all of that from kind of the reverse side. And that is great storytelling. And that, I think, is the kind of storytelling that these four creators can execute. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me step back.
But you're talking about the stuff on Game of Thrones.
I did. Hold on. I forgot my thread there for a second. But the reaction to that episode of The Sopranos from a lot of people was a lot of controversy about the rape, and then a lot of rape advocates attacking David Chase and the creators of The Sopranos as wanting to victimize their character. Look at what they did to this character. They don't respect women. They don't respect this character. They don't, it was almost as though they were treating the character as a real person that the creators of the show were victimizing because they don't care about women. So it got into this weird, twisted, if your story has bad things happen to your characters, that means you don't respect your characters, you don't respect the minorities they're from, or the genders they're from, or their background stories. You're just, a white man that oppresses or attacks these characters.
Don't necessarily agree with that.
I don't. Well, actually, let me step back. Say what you're going to say about that, because I don't agree with it either. But that's a criticism.
I understand where people are coming from. As a woman who's watching these shows, especially if we're gonna keep it to Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
We're getting off topic, but
Yeah.
that's fine. It's disappointing when pretty much every female character on Game of Thrones at some point is threatened with rape or is raped. It happens over and over and over on the show. It's like they can't, everything is like that. It's going to happen to all of them. They're threatened with it at all points. I mean, it even happened to Brienne in one of the episodes. They were going to rape Brienne. You could try putting yourself like my shoes, or imagine every male character in every show was threatened with rape all the time. You would probably be like, not this again.
Right.
Can we stop with the rape?
Well, I hear you.
Basically, if every single episode of Game of Thrones was like an episode of Oz.
Right. Well, no, I hear you, but that is the word. That is an expression of a lawless world. That is an expression of a world where people with power have the ability to do whatever they want. With the men in Game of Thrones, they either castrate them, flay them, or murder them outright. And with the women of Game of Thrones, they threaten to rape them, and then murder them outright.
Well, maybe we would all just prefer to, be murdered then.
Well, no, I get it.
The rape's getting a little played out.
I totally get it, but I think from a contingent of the criticizers of Game of Thrones, there's this idea that, the women are the only ones that are victimized, and the women are the ones that, take the brunt of all the horror on Game of Thrones, and the men, it's just, everyone takes these horrors.
I would argue that nobody's getting, everybody's getting victimized on Game of Thrones.
And I would agree with you 100%. So,
but let's go back to Confederate.
Well, yeah, so there's this charged atmosphere of attacks on creators that are doing certain kinds of things and planning certain kinds of things, and these bad assumptions that get made about creators. So all of that is coming at these creators. So when they do come out with kind of something that on its surface does seem like a pretty controversial and dangerous idea, all this stuff gets thrown at them that I don't think is necessarily fair, but from the point of view of people outside writers' rooms, from people who don't have to create stories and create characters for a living, it is kind of understandable, and I almost feel as though it's kind of this free-range worry that's gripped a lot of America that, since the election, that is kind of finding these sometimes not necessarily appropriate outlets. Because when you hear about Confederate, in some of the criticisms I've heard leveled at it, it's almost as though they're expecting Benioff and Weiss and Spellman to create a show that somehow glorifies slavery or glorifies the South not being part of the Union and kind of normalizes all this and doesn't, show the horror of what's going on, which I just can't imagine that they're going to make a show like that. I can't imagine that would be their idea. And I do find it pretty interesting that a lot of the criticism is, these two white guys are going to be making this show about, slavery, completely dismissing the African-American creators that are creating the show right along with them.
To be fair, HBO issued a press release and really played up the creators of Game of Thrones and downplayed that these other people were involved. So the initial thing that went out was like, hey, the Game of Thrones guys are making a new show, you guys.
Yeah.
Instead of, maybe the announcement didn't go the way maybe it should have. And maybe a little bit more sensitivity could have pitched this as more of a, hey, we're going to do like kind of like a Handmaid's Tale, but it's really going to be about race.
Exactly. Yeah.
And people would have been like, that sounds kind of interesting. But instead it came out as, hey, these white guys are going to, make some like white supremacy fantasy porn and it's going to be awesome. Or, like the message wasn't told very well. And I do understand like the worry. Like I saw some tweets where somebody tweeted that it was basically slavery fan fiction. And I think that I totally could see that worry. And I do think that like racism, it's still here. Like we're talking about like, I don't know. Did you see the documentary, The 13th?
No, I didn't.
About like,
I've
it's
heard
about the like,
yeah,
it's about the mass incarceration of Black people. And, and all the police shootings and all the hate crimes and, racism is, somebody went into a church in South Carolina. Was it South Carolina, North Carolina? And shot, it's, it's still so raw. It's almost like it's too soon still because it's still here, like in a really big way. And like, but I also, and I want to make it clear, like I would be worried that racist people would watch the show and think it's something that we should aspire to instead of something that we should be ashamed of. But I also don't think like we should be like stifling creativity because we're worried about like how the worst people in society will react to it.
Right. I'm with you, and I hear what you're saying, and I think, I mean, I can't imagine that they would make a show that would make modern day slavery look glamorous or
I would hope not.
No, but that's the thing is the idea that they're really going to do this is a paranoid fantasy. I do understand the worry and I would question the sensitivity. And if, I were in the NAACP or some of these groups paying attention to this, I would definitely take a couple shots across the bow of HBO and say, hey, we are going to be watching this. We are going to be paying attention to this. So you better come correct. Yeah. However, a lot of these groups are part of I think the professional outrage class that we've been talking about over the life of this podcast, which is, no, they want to shut everything down. They want to stop it. They want the people fired whose idea it was. And they just, no. And in a weird way,
well, they haven't said that. Have they said that?
I believe that there have been some calls, but I'll admit I don't know how reputable or prominent the calls for them being fired. But yeah, I've definitely heard more than a few calls to have this show canceled. And I just think I think people have a right to be concerned, absolutely. And there's like a lot of red flags here. And, people are also, they keep, like, I read a lot of stuff. Well, we have the man in the high castle. Right.
And I'm like, okay, well, that's different. It seems different to me because the climate here is still so racially charged, how we're still having to like tell people they can't fly Confederate flags, how we're having to take down like Confederate monuments still,
Right.
And because I'm pretty sure in Germany you can't really fly a Nazi flag, am I right?
That's correct.
Like they've really paid for their sins,
right? Well, here's an idea I want to throw by you. Is there's a weird way in where the kind of the scolds of the right and the scolds of the left are both coming at entertainment and wanting it to serve their interests. I remember a lot, I've had more than a few discussions with my relatively more conservative family members and extended family, where it's just like, well, why can't they just have characters who get along, and why do they have to have all this strife? They just get along and everything's not fine, but everybody does the right thing and everybody knows what to do.
That'd be an awesome show.
And it's because that wouldn't be a story. There's no story there, and there's no learning there. And you get a similar thing, I think, with a lot of the scolds on the left now, which is if you're not making a show that portrays the political landscape that I want to see, I'm going to call you a racist. I'm going to call you a homophobe. I'm going to call you a sexist. I'm going to ascribe all of these sins to you that, you know, that's kind of one of the things that brought up that Sopranos reference I was thinking about earlier is you get, you know, David Chase being accused of being for violence against women because one of his his character gets raped in the story that they're trying to tell about, you know, making moral choices. And I think another thing is I do really hear the worry, especially in this climate, of people who are afraid this is not going to get treated well.
Right.
I think the problem is, and I've actually seen this on some of the work that I've done on college campuses, and I'm not gonna get too much into it, but I'll just tell this little story. Is we were doing a series of videos for a college, and there was a T-shirt with a Native American art on it, and so we shot the video, presented it to the people that were going
like somebody was wearing it.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Presented it to the people who were going to approve it, who were all white. And they said, oh, well, you know, that's appropriating Native American iconography, blah, 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 blah. Take it out. So what happens is, especially, you know, with the lack of diversity in the decision-making trees of a lot of these networks is when you're going to put out something that examines something or includes something from a minority, the reaction when controversy comes or when you're afraid controversy is going to come is, you know what, let's just take that out. We don't need the headache. So what this did when in this series of videos that I was making for this college is essentially whitewashing the series.
Right.
You take out all the stuff, you take out this, you take out that, you take out this, and what's left? Some, you know, anodyne minorities, no Native American representation in any way of anything. And I would be afraid that if a television network or Netflix or something is going to try to do some interesting speculative storytelling, sci-fi genre type storytelling, that examine some of these questions of race, and they get this kind of reaction, it's going to be, well, you know what, let's not bother. Because that is one of the things that perpetuates.
Or maybe they should start hiring.
Well, they should, and
people
they do,
of
but that's
people of color, and
they should
to tell these stories.
But when the people of color run this flag up the pole, what they're going to get is, hey, you know what? That's too much of a hot topic. Go get me the next Empire or something. They're not going to, and I am afraid that these kinds of backlashes are actually one of the things that gives nervous white power brokers cover for when they keep things Caucasian. You know, because they can always go to the board, they can always go to their, you know, creatives, and they can say, well, we love your idea, but we can't handle a headache like this, so we're going to pass. And what that does is, you know, that's one, I think.
Well, then
that's
they
one, that's one of the reasons that even in 2017, we have the racial disparities and all that on television now, is because whenever anybody goes out and starts to do some more interesting stuff, they get hammered down. And when they get hammered, the reaction is, let's revert to what we know, which is essentially white people with problems.
Well, I was going to say, like, my concern is purely like the topic. It has nothing to do with who's running it. That's
right.
For me, I would, you know, it's not like, oh, it's because it's the guy from Game of Thrones that makes me nervous. Like, the topic itself makes me nervous. So I can imagine, you know, maybe where they're coming from. But I also think we should, everyone needs to be careful about the idea of, like, just because they're white guys means they can't tell a certain kind of story. Because then it's like the idea of, well, you just need to stick it, stay in your lane.
Exactly.
That sort of thing. And the idea that then maybe Spike Lee shouldn't be making a movie like Summer of Sam.
Right.
Or something, because, well, that's not about Black people. So what does he know about it? That sort of thing. Like,
yeah.
I don't like I don't love the idea of telling people to stick in their lane.
Yeah.
But I also the story is for sure concerning, and like those are legit concerns, and I get it.
I think that's where I'm coming down, is they're legit concerns, but I'll be honest, I have a really hard time imagining Nichelle Spellman and Malcolm Spellman signing on to a show that's going to do something like that. And that is, in this current outrage culture, one of the things that I am pretty irritated about.
There's no way that they would be like, yeah, we're totally fine with something that's.
And the way that they're being dismissed in this coverage is a little strange. It's kind of like, well, we want to portray this, and that goes with this.
It's not fitting the narrative that we want.
It's not fitting the narrative that it's white people doing awful things, so we're just going to kind of forget that they're involved. But I mean, that's dumb Twitter internet outrage BS. So I guess that's what we should expect.
Well, I also think, like I said, I don't think that initial press release did them any favors.
I agree 100%, and that is definitely a Hollywood blind spot, because I'm sure the writer of that press release, the two biggest names in that press release were Benioff and Weiss, right, because they're running the biggest show on television now, right, that's coming to the end of its huge run. So we're going to take their names and trumpet it to the stars. So I get that, but yeah, I don't know. I've actually listened to Malcolm Spellman talk on the Script Notes podcast, and I'll try to have a link in the show notes discussing that. And he's an interesting, he doesn't have a traditional path to screenwriting. And it's interesting. And I that is I'll admit, that is one of the things that I'm a little frustrated about with this reaction, which is him working with Benioff and Weiss after what they've done. I want to see this show. I think he could do some really interesting, crazy, Star Trek-like genre storytelling, fantastical storytelling to address the problems of modern America. And I'm afraid if this controversy keeps building the way it's been building, that HBO might just do the thing. They might revert to type. Say this is too much of a headache, and in 6 months there will be a quiet announcement that because of scheduling conflicts, they're not going to be moving forward with Confederate. That brings us to our status check this week again of Game of Thrones, episodes 3 and 4 of season 7. This show is going like a freight train, so we have brought back our resident Game of Thrones expert and lover, Sonia Mansfield. No. Peter Brown from Assignment X. Peter Brown, hello.
I am a lover, but not an expert.
I don't know if I would call myself an expert. I'm a dork. How about that? A Game of Thrones dork.
Hey, no, that works. That makes you an expert on this show.
Very appropriate.
So, episode 3, The Queen's Justice. This is going to be a much quicker intro than last time. Daenerys meets Jon. Cersei gains a new ally. Sansa receives an unexpected visitor. Sam is confronted for his actions. Episode 4, The Spoils of War. Daenerys fights back. Jaime faces an unexpected situation. Holy cow, could that not be more vague?
That's an understatement.
That's right. That is...
Did you get some TV guide? What is this?
Now that I'm thinking about it, Jaime faces an unexpected situation could be the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It could be the 5-word description for every episode of television for every single show since the beginning. Episode 72. Spock faces an unexpected situation.
Actually, this is the exact description of everything that's happened to Jamie since the first episode.
That's right. The lawyers of McKinsey, Brackman, Cheney, and Cusack face an unexpected situation. Sorry. Also, Arya comes home in a very special episode of Game of Thrones. Peter.
Special.
What do you have to say about episodes 3 and 4 of Game of Thrones? How is this? We're more than halfway through this part of season 7.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
I know. I'm feeling pretty good. I'm enjoying everything that's happening so far. I'm a little worried that there's only 9 episodes left. That's kind of a little troublesome for me because I'm not sure they're going to be able to get to everything they need to get to. I guess is the best way to put it. All the unanswered questions. Resolve all the plot lines. I don't know. I actually was going to bring that up probably a little later, but as far as these episodes go, they're. I think I liked how the Jon Snow and Daenerys meet went, because
meet cute. Meet cute.
Because it was like, as fans were like, yes, finally. Our two heroes are together. Let's get them married quickly and let's kill the White Walkers right now. At least that's what I said. That's me. But
the fan fiction.
That's right. But you have these two people who've never met before, obviously, and so they've all each heard a great deal about each other. They at least have like some level of respect for each other. But they've both been through the ringer, and so they can't just like give their trust away immediately. And I thought that it was actually handled extremely well in that regard. Like, Jon didn't back down. He also proved he probably not fit to be a king, because he just can't kind of handle that aspect of it. But like, Dany definitely seems like she can be the queen, but still Jon isn't willing to kind of just roll over, and he's kind of looking after his people and himself too, because he knows he's been screwed over so many times. So I thought it was smartly handled in that regard. What did you think, Sonia?
I like that he's such a good leader. Like, he really does care about his people, and he's like, no, this isn't the right move for my people. So I think I like that. And every time, though, we see Dany and Jon together, I just start thinking of Peter's fan fiction. And I'm like, when are they going to make out?
That's right. Well, and in episode 4, they came a little closer, I would say. I mean, even Davos said, you're not looking at her heart very often.
Yeah. So, by the way,
I don't have time for that. I love that.
Was his name Davos? Davos? Yeah. I love him so much.
I do too. I love in episode 3 where the lady gives all of Dany's titles and just rolls on and on and off. Yes. And then he goes, here's Jon Snow. Oh yeah, he might be the king of the North.
Or something. That's right. I loved all of his stuff with Dany's translator, whose name I don't remember people's names. So
I think it's Melisandre.
Yeah, that's right. I loved the stuff with her, and like he clearly is a little sweet on her, I think, and I just think it's really funny. But are we talking about just episode 3 or 4? Or
can we talk about both? Yeah, let me step back. Let's hit a little bit on 3.
Okay, then... I'm excited that the Starks are finally starting to come home to Winterfell. Yeah. It's nice. It's a nice and that's what has to happen at the end, right? They're going to start coming home. We're going to start getting these reunions, and that's part of it's one of the many things I love about the show. Is the show's been, it broke them up and separated them in those like first 2 or 3 episodes. I think sent them kind of all over, and now it's really set the table. And so now it's all just starting to pay off. Like, every episode, there's a payoff now where your patience has been rewarded.
Yeah.
And now we're getting like, the Starks are starting to come home, and we're getting those nice little reunions and moments, or maybe sometimes it's awkward or whatever, but I like that we're getting those things. And I like that so many of the characters that we super love are starting to cross paths. Yeah. Now, stories just coming in like closer and closer and closer and getting, it's been so widespread, I guess. And now it's just starting to come in.
Yeah.
And I'm in. Like, I super love it. And I want to talk about episode 4 really bad, but I'll wait. Smith, what do you think about episode 3?
Well, actually, no. Why don't you step on to episode 4? Let's get into that also. Give your little thoughts on that.
Just me, like everyone else who watches Game of Thrones, like I lose my S, man, when the dragons show up. I'm like, it's a dragon. Like, I just get so, like, my husband doesn't watch the show, so like he's in the other room, and all he hears me is like he heard like a bunch of giggling because I was like, the dragons are burning people, and I'm like, oh, it's happening because the Lannisters, like, they walk around like they're the cock of the walk all the time, and like they think their army's so badass, and they're awful people, and then the dragons show up and start just burning them, and I'm like, yes.
That was one hell of a barbecue.
But then, then I start freaking out because if it looks like the dragons are going to get hurt or killed, I get very upset. Apparently, I'm totally fine with a dragon just setting fire to like thousands of people, but not okay with somebody sticking a dragon with an arrow, like, or cutting off horses' legs. I don't like that either.
That was so I guess what we're learning is dragons are the dogs of Westeros.
Yes,
you can murder humans by the thousands, but you be mean to one dragon, and then you're on Sonya's S list now.
I love I just love how ruthless Dany's army is. Like, we haven't really got to see them fight.
Yeah, anybody else? Yeah,
really. Like, when's the last time we saw them fight? Like, maybe in like the first or second season we saw.
Well, actually,
and
I think
they didn't really fight anybody other than themselves. Really, it seemed like. So we've actually really never seen them fight anybody.
We did see them take Highgarden in episode at the end of episode 3, but I do take your point.
The Sons of Harpy or whatever, right? They fought them.
Yeah,
right.
So
I like how badass they are, just how ruthless and dirty they fight compared to like these trained soldiers, I guess.
They're like a million Brawns, basically.
Right.
Like Braun is like the dirty fighter, right? But they're like, all of them are like Braun.
What's funny is, you watch like the like after the episode, they on HBO now, I don't know how you guys watch it, but on HBO now they have like an after the episode, and they kind of interview the creators and stuff like that about the episode you just saw.
Right.
And when they talk about this battle between Dany and Jaime, they're like, it's really hard because who do you root for? And I was like, for Dany, you dummies. Like, nobody's rooting for Jaime over Dany.
I mean, I'm definitely not. Go ahead.
Well, I think people are starting to come around to Jaime. I think, or maybe it's just me, but I think I'm not alone in that he's always had this Rosa conscience.
Oh yeah,
but he's still a Lannister who's working for Cersei.
No, that's
true.
No
one's rooting.
No,
for
that's
her.
true. But it's kind of like for a moment in this battle in episode 4 where the dragons come and just flay everyone. It looked as though essentially he was going to die for the sins of Cersei, which would be a very Game of Thrones twisted, wicked, cruel, but also horribly plausible turn of events. So I think there is this kind of I was actually let me step back. I was kind of expecting him to die, but now that I think about it, the last image we saw was him sinking. So I guess theoretically he could still not quite make it.
I don't watch the like scenes from next week. Like, I don't watch that stuff, so I don't know.
No, this was him at the end of this episode.
No, what I mean is, like, I don't know if he's in the next episode or like, is he alive or dead?
That's true.
Is what I mean.
You know what? I don't think he's gonna. I don't think they've killed him off. There's no way. Yeah. And like you say, like, I think Jaime is actually incredibly popular among fans. I think he's extremely popular given his relationship with Brienne. Right when they had that little heart-to-heart kind of pseudo romance thing that they had a couple seasons ago. Like you could see that, and once his hand got chopped off, like Jamie became a completely different character than the character he was.
Right.
He became kind of more emotional, became more like sensitive to other people, and it's kind of carried on. And yeah, he's still doing kind of the bidding of Cersei, but I think he's doing it just out of his love for Cersei. You know, he doesn't necessarily want to do these
Which
things.
is so gross.
I think you could see that when he was with the Queen of Thorns, the Tyrell Queen. At the end, you know, he kind of was like, I don't really want to kill you, but I kind of have to. Of course, when she told him that she had killed Joffrey,
oh my God,
he changed his mind. But you know,
I was so bummed because I love that character so much. I love how she was just a straight shooter.
Yeah.
Oh, you know, and it was a bummer to see her go, but you knew it was going to happen. But I love that, like, I love that she gets that last moment, which, like, by the way, I totally killed your son, and I want you to know I did it. Well, bye, glug glug.
And she called him a C word too, which was brilliant.
Yeah,
right.
But no, I don't think Jamie is dead by a long shot. I still think that Jamie has a very important role to play in this series before all is said and done. I really do.
Actually, well, there could be an indication of that I'm going to get to here in a minute. But first, I wanted to say, correct me if I'm wrong, or I want to see what you guys think. This season, in the middle seasons of this show, it was kind of an open question when they did get a lot of criticism for nudity and all that kind of stuff, and kind of the rapes and the whoring and the whatever. It was a kind of an open question about, is this really going to any purpose, or are they doing this for titillation factor or just shock value or whatever? You know, one of the reasons that I stopped watching The Walking Dead is because the quality of the storytelling and the level of storytelling was not high enough to put up with the level of gore and nihilism and heartbreak and cruelty and depression, and it was just an unbelievably unpleasant show to watch after a while. And I think with this season, and it's come up more than a few times, and it came up in episode 4 with John's discussion of what kind of queen Daenerys is, which is, you know, are you the kind of queen that does these new, cool, impossible things, or are you the kind of queen that just burns everything, kills everyone, and turns everything to shit like every other ruler that Westeros has had for the last thousands of years? You know, and I think the idea that all of this heartbreak and horror is moving to this point where almost like the fever is breaking in Westeros, and there's a contingent of good people that have learned to play the Game of Thrones, learned how to maneuver the levers of power, but have not kind of lost their humanity and do want to make a better world. You know, because now the people in power, Daenerys, Jon, Sansa, and I am really feeling heartfelt that the happiness that we're starting to get from this show is really well earned. Like when Arya came home, well, you know, a couple things. When Arya came home, it was a very, even more than Bran coming home, or even more than Sansa and Jon connecting back up, it was a very stark revelation of how far all of these characters had come. Last time Arya saw Sansa, she was kind of witless and flighty and not paying attention to stuff and just interested in dresses and whatever. And now she's a cold, calculating, but good, decent, serious ruler. You know, Arya was just played at swords, as, you know, that's one of the things that, you know, the Warden of the North's daughter gets to do because she's rich and doesn't really have anything to do. And now she's one of the best fighters in Westeros, taking on Brienne and beating her.
Well, they're both they're both what they wanted to be,
right?
Kind of.
Well,
it's like
I'm not sure I would say Sansa is what she wanted to be.
Well, no, meaning like, you know, she wanted to be like a lady and a ruler and all those things, but not this way,
Well,
obviously.
you know what? Actually, yeah.
You know, and like Arya did want to learn how to sword fight. She didn't want to make a list of people she wanted to kill.
Right.
But you know, they wanted these things, and now they're like this weird kind of twisted version of it.
Right.
Yeah. You could almost see that in the reunion too, because they
Yeah.
were kind of like, you know, when they left, they weren't necessarily. I mean, they were sisters and they had that bond, but they weren't necessarily like that close. They were never really that close
Because they were so different.
It's so different. And like when they were reunited, when they are reunited, they're kind of like, oh hey, and you know they hug and embrace and they're happy to see each other. But it's not the same thing as when Jon and Sansa came back together. When they had like that very long emotional embrace. They were both crying. You know.
I think I have to disagree a little bit. And I thought that scene between Arya and Sansa in the crypt was one of the most touching scenes all season, because they hug and then they talk a little bit and then they kind of size each other up and then they hug again. And it's like, it was almost like one hug isn't enough to express what they had. One hug didn't do it. So they're really feeling all of the time having moved through them, the price that they've both paid to kind of get to where they're at now. And it's just, heartbreaking. And I don't know. One of the things that I've always liked about this series, and George R.R. Martin has always been very upfront about this, which is I am always going to take the fantasy novel trope that you're expecting to see and flip it over on its head. So he's, so he kills characters off in weird and strange ways at random and awful times. So now by the time he's actually putting his characters through the motions of the good people are rising to the top, friends are coming back together, they're girding themselves for one final battle, you're kind of expecting them to lose. You're expecting them to have, and I almost think that he's going to surprise us by kind of giving us what our hearts really want most for the characters. He's going to give the right people their victory, but it's going to be so earned and so unexpected given the awful, cruel twists and turns of this world, that it's going to feel like the first time. It's going to feel like we've never been through this before. And I think if, I suspect it's going to be immensely satisfying.
I hope so.
But
I think it has to go that way, because if it doesn't, then at the end you almost feel like you wasted your time.
Well, that's true. I agree. But would you put it past these storytellers?
I'm not saying I would put it past him. I'm just saying, I feel like the best way to end it is, kind of a happier note, because then you leave it feeling satisfied instead of like, well, that was a bummer.
Yeah.
I'm glad I watched, 8 seasons of that.
Right.
Right. Well, that's kind of why I'm a little worried, to be honest, because, there are only 9 episodes left of the show. And so are they going to be able to satisfy fans with an ending that's going to be appropriate, or what they feel appropriate, because there's a lot left to do, and a lot to figure out, and a lot of unanswered plot lines to go before it all ends. I think that they can do it. I just am kind of a little worried that maybe not everything will get resolved. So
right. Well, what are real quick? What are some of the things that you want to see resolved?
Well, just in terms of just are they going to have are they going to deal with Cersei the way that they should be in time to get back to the North to defend the North, or are the White Walkers gonna take the North first?
There's basically two huge battles that need to happen,
and they're spending a lot of time building up the battle with Cersei, which obviously I understand, and I guess they could get to it if they just don't focus on a lot of the other things that they've been focusing on. So, but I just am curious. It's because I draw a correlation to Battlestar Galactica, which was one of my top 5 TV series of all time. It's like their finale had a few episodes where left some fans that were not too happy with how it ended. Like, I was okay with it. I thought it had enough emotion and finality to it, But I could see where like the fans are coming from with like all the unanswered questions and everything that and the weird ending that kind of had. So I just kind of thinking, will this kind of do the same thing? Whereas they leave a lot left on the table. Maybe that'll be a spinoff or something. I don't know. But I'm just kind of curious as to see what will go on.
Well, let me throw this idea by you, because one of the other podcasts that I listen to having to do with pop culture is The Watch on the Ringer Network, and they had an interesting discussion that. Well, let me step back. First, there's two big things that still has to happen: the fight with the White Walkers and the fight with Cersei. You know, given that there are 3 more episodes, you could have one fight in one episode and still have one more episode left over, and then season 8 is, whatever. No, but I know that they're not going to just blast through it that quickly. But
that's the Walking Dead approach, though. That's what they do. They build an entire thing up, and then they have one episode where it all kind of comes together, and then everybody's like, "That was it."
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know if they want to do that.
Well, you could be right though, but I'm actually interested in. There's been some pretty big battles in just these first 4 episodes. There's been like a relatively big, like a season-ending battle for any other previous season. Pretty much in every episode, I'm thinking.
But the battle for the kingdoms is what the whole show has been about this whole time. So it's like, are you really going to just shoot your wad in one episode? Like, don't you want to wouldn't the battle be like over a couple of episodes, and now we only have how many left?
Right. Well,
how many do we have left, Peter?
I think we have.
I think there's 9 left.
9.
There you go.
So there's 3 left in this season, and then I think the last season is 6 episodes.
So now let me throw this idea by you for that I was referencing from the podcast The Watch. Next episode, and here we're getting into not even really spoilers, but speculation of what could be coming ahead, because we don't know.
Well, that's why people are listening to this. They want to hear that stuff. So
Bran has had some vision where the White Walkers are attacking Eastwatch along the wall. The next week's episode, is called Eastwatch. The second to last episode of this season, which is usually this episode with the penultimate episode, is usually the one with the biggest, craziest fight, with the biggest, craziest consequences, is directed by Alan Taylor, who directed a lot of the first couple seasons of Game of Thrones. So he and has now gone on to he's gone on to a film career. I was going to say a distinguished film career, but then I remember he directed Terminator Genesis. Point is, he's coming back to do the second to last episode, which, because of where it's placed, hints at it being a big episode. Because he's coming back to just do one episode this season, hints that it's a big, significant episode. It comes right after what I think we can assume might be a White Walker attack on Eastwatch next week. So are we... And let me put one more cherry on top of this word Sunday. When Daenerys when her dragon got hit by that arrow in episode 4 and she was falling to the earth, my son, Harrison Smith, who is a Game of Thrones expert, who's previously been on this podcast, said, "Hey, don't worry about it. She's got plot armor. Tyrion, Jon, and Daenerys have plot armor. Nothing is going to happen to them until the end of the series." But I don't know. I have this season, now that I'm thinking this through, our characters have been on glide paths pointing them in a direction that the fans want to see. And every single time that has happened on this show before, crazy people, crazy events come out of nowhere and murder the characters that we love. So now that I'm saying it, I'm almost wondering if Jon, Tyrion, or Daenerys buy it. Not next week, but the week after.
I could see Tyrion biting it for sure. I don't know about Daenerys. I think she's pretty much kill proof at this point. And John, maybe he might die like sacrificing himself or something. That definitely could be. But I don't.
Right
think
after she learns who he is.
I don't think Daenerys is probably going to perish in any way. She's way too popular.
Do you think Tyrion, though? Tyrion's been the pillar of this show since the beginning. Do you think they would have the balls to kill him off?
Oh yeah.
This season?
Oh yeah. No, I would probably think it might happen next season.
It's interesting. Well, because she did have that discussion with him on episode 4 that we watched tonight, that he had all these clever plans on how to take over Westeros, right, and they all seem to be burning to ashes. And
yeah, all of them are.
She's not too happy with it, especially after the victory that in tonight's episode. I would not put it past her to fly back to her castle and say, "Hey, thanks for all the advice. Thanks for getting me
there."
Here. But oh no, that's right. He is there.
He's at the battle.
You're right.
So she's not too mad at him. She brought him with her.
Well, but now that I'm thinking,
But there's gonna be if Jaime lives, and I assume he does, there's gonna be a really awkward moment where
that'll be interesting.
Yeah, and now Jaime knows for a fact that Tyrion didn't kill his son.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. So
wait a minute. Hold on.
So
kids.
now there's a whole.
I don't think he ever did.
Wait a minute.
I don't think he ever.
Okay, hold on.
No, but now he knows for sure.
He wouldn't have helped him escape if he had really thought that he had killed his son.
So
I think all along he thought it was somebody else, and that's why he helped him escape. So now he knows for sure that it wasn't him. So
what do you think the chances are of them capturing Jaime next week? Them deciding to either hurt Cersei by killing him off in the second to last episode, or Jaime and Tyrion have some kind of bargain, come to some kind of agreement that I'm going to let you out, big brother, but what you need to do is solve this problem of Cersei that we all know is there. This kingdom has been a madness of violence since the War of the Five Kings, since go take care of Cersei and
I could definitely see that
thing where she's they capture him and she's like, you need to kneel to me, or she's going to kill him, and then maybe Tyrion feels the need to step in.
Maybe.
And then, all hell breaks loose.
Interesting. Wow.
There's a lot of stuff there that could happen.
But
that Chris, what you said definitely goes along with my theory that I think Jaime will end up killing Cersei.
Yeah. I definitely think that's a serious theory. It just has a...
Story-wise, it's probably the most interesting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It replicates history, right? Because he had to do that with the Mad King. He killed the Mad King when he was going to burn everybody to the ground. Right. And so when she's back into the corner, we know what happens. She uses... she's going to burn everybody to the ground, right?
Hey, Jaime, you're so good at killing Mad Kings.
Why don't you just become
Why
don't you become a queen slayer? You may as well. There's only a slight bit of difference between the two. All right. Peter Brown, is there anything that you would like to say about Game of Thrones Episode 3, The Queen's Justice, or Game of Thrones Episode 4, The Spoils of War, before we close the segment out?
Nope, but I do love Sir Davis, so that guy's great. Love that guy.
Sonia Mansfield, are there any characters that you would like to endorse, or anything you would like to say before we close this episode out?
I just want to say I'm really glad that we're doing this. This is really fun.
Yes,
it is.
It is.
It is.
I watch this show by myself, so I'm really excited that after it's over, I have someone to talk to. Yay!
So yes, now to remind our listeners, we are going to play out the rest of Game of Thrones with these kind of segment 3s of our show, and then in September we're going to be starting up with Star Trek Discovery with Peter and David Tracy and certain guest stars to be named later, who I think you will all find very interesting.
However, given the fact that Akiva Goldsman did The Dark Tower and is a controlling producer on Star Trek Discovery, my enthusiasm has taken a severe blow in the last 48 hours.
If he makes Star Trek as boring as he made Dark Tower, I will be very disappointed.
Set your phasers to disappointment. All right.
You always boo me when I make those jokes.
I do, but I am low. I am laid low by the prospects of this show. However, I could be wrong. I would love to be wrong. It never happens. Never ever happens.
It almost always happens.
But I would love to see it happen. Sonia Mansfield, is there anything else you would like to say?
I'll just say goodbye.
Bye!
The Dorking Out Show is on Twitter at Dorking Out Show, where you can find Chris at Jet Jurgens and Sonia at The Sonia Show. You can read about Sonia's random adventures at thesoniashow.com and track the slow and creeping progress of Chris's novel and his other hijinks at jetjurgens.com. You can find out more about The Dorking Out Show at dorkingoutshow.com. While you're over there, you can support us by giving us a review on iTunes. We have a handy-dandy iTunes link to whisk you right back to 2007, where you can leave your review and 5-star rating in iTunes. We'd do it for your podcast. Want to dork out even more? Well, you can sign up for our newsletter, where you'll get all the headlines we use as fuel for the show. That's it for this week. Thanks for listening.